Hi, Anthony. Thank you so much for doing this interview. Really grateful. It's great for young people to have a role model to listen to and aspire to, etc. I understand you've been away to Toronto for a few years. Can you tell us how things look from Toronto in the UK, in the Northeast, and around the world, in fact, in terms of arts and culture? That's a big question.
Yeah, it's several huge questions, isn't it? Why don't I work inwards out? So from the Northeast. So I've lived and worked in the Northeast for 15 years. Before that, I was in other parts of the UK, and then I've been in Canada for 5 years. And while I was in Toronto, while I was in the Northeast, I was also chair of the New York-based International Society for the Performing Arts. So I've had quite some global couple of decades, really.
Wow.
And I think what struck me a little bit when I moved to the Northeast, so 20 years ago now, and I'm having been out of it for 5 years, I can't really tell whether this is still the same, but I sort of sense that it is. I mean, the UK is very much a community focused on England is a community focused on its capital city, like France, say, unlike Germany. And for communities sort of a considerable distance from London in physical and perhaps attitudinal terms, there's a challenge in that. And I've always thought, since I was living in the Northeast, how interesting and instructive it was to relate the Northeast and the Northwest, which are both, I mean, they're not quite as far away from London, but they share a sense that they are quite significant self-contained communities some distance from London. And it seemed to me that the Northeast's range and depth of culture is more, I think, more interesting than the Northwest. I think there's a very extraordinary depth of culture in the Northeast. It comes from not just cultural history of the region, but the social history, the industrial, human history of the region. All kinds of things have generated what we now think of as Northeast culture. And I think that's particularly true. That's a very particular thing about the Northeast. And I think with that has maybe come a sense of a very particular kind of individualism in the Northeast. I mean, a lot of the great people we think of as Northeast artists are they're writers, they're playwrights, they're people who do individual things. So I think if the Northeast's had a challenge, and certainly in the 15 years I was here, it's got all kinds of strengths and it's got all kinds of glorious things about living here as a cultural community, but it did have a challenge, I think, which is finding a way to express its relationship with London and with the UK government in a singular, in a powerfully cohesive way. And that's been something I think that the culturally less interesting Northwest has interestingly found easier. And then I've been away for 5 years, and then I come back, and I sort of sense that that's still a challenge. And if anything, I think the centralizing instincts of this government, which were there quite apart from the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has really intensified this I think quite unhealthy centralizing instincts of this government, have made that situation more challenging for the Northeast, I sense. So, I mean, just to your wider questions, nationally and internationally, I think it's difficult to talk about positive things from a pandemic that's killed so many millions of people. But one of the things I think that's been instructive in it is I can't remember in my lifetime a challenge that was global in the sense that the pandemic has been. You know, the Second World War, enormous as it was, there were parts of the world not touched by it. And I can't remember a challenge, and I'm, when you go back before 50 years, obviously, in terms of communications, there won't have been one. So this is the most globally embracing and omnivorous challenge that the human race has ever faced, I think. And I think it's interesting that that's come, for the arts, it's come at a time when people's connectivity in terms of digital and online ways of connecting and building and sustaining and developing communities is richer than it's ever been before. And there's an accident of timing in that. But I think the pandemic has really accelerated this. So what I have noticed globally is a real sense of the cultural community recognizing that they have a common challenge, a common foe, to use Johnsonian imagery, and able to do something about that in terms of communicating internationally that they probably wouldn't have been able to do 10 or 15 years ago. And I think there's enormously exciting potential in that, even at a time when we're wrestling with so many difficult challenges.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. No, this is, I mean, just following on from that, it's interesting because just in my own little world, the number of people who are being creative digitally has, risen exponentially, and that's fantastic. Whether or not they can sustain an income or generate income is something else as artists and musicians. Have you got anything to say on that, or what might help? Or
yeah, well, I've thought about it a lot. Obviously, there's two bits of that. There's the bit that is specific to the online world, and there's the more general issue of artists and livelihoods and how they create livings for themselves. Let me deal with them in that order. So I think the what's been really interesting, I think, and the pandemic has been a help in this. There's no question about that. That a year ago, there was a lot of live culture everywhere, and you could go to live concerts, plays, and even when I talk about museums and galleries, I include those in the live experience, the experience of physically showing up somewhere and experiencing art. And then the digital world slightly lived on the edge of that. For some people, it was more important than others, but the core of experience, everybody would have said, was the live experience. Now, for the last 12 months, there has been effectively no live experience. So people have had a choice as consumers. Either they give up on the arts for a year, and some people have done that, undoubtedly. Some people have done that, and the arts has fallen out of their lives. They represent an enormous challenge to us, I think, in terms of the future, in terms of how we get them back. But the people who've wanted to keep the arts in their lives have had no choice. They've had to do it digitally. Now, there are lots of things about that. One is suddenly they have a global range of options to choose from. They don't just have to go to the theatre or the art gallery down the road. They can just as easily look at what's happening in Paraguay or in Vienna. And that's, but in a way, from the point of view of your question, the other important consequence of that, apart from the sudden internationalism of it, is money. There's been a lot of research done on this, because obviously everybody is researching this pandemic like crazy, because there's so many really important learnings in it. And quite a lot of research has been done on people's preparedness to pay for online stuff. So can you monetize online stuff? And a year ago, you couldn't. A year ago, famously, everybody expected the internet to be free. There is a lot of evidence now. And if you look at it online, you'll find it. I mean, lots of people have, there have been surveys in this country, surveys in North America, surveys in Europe, where people have recognized partly there isn't a choice, but also rather belatedly, they've begun to recognize a kind of moral duty, actually, to make a financial contribution to the arts that they enjoy. And I think people's attitude to paying for online culture, and therefore from artists' perspective, the ability to monetize online culture, I think will be irreversibly changed by this. Now, to your other question, the larger business of earning a living from the arts. I mean, there are parts of the arts where there are regulated agreements. There are performers agreements, publishing agreements, and all kinds of things. So there are great chunks of the arts where if you do a particular thing, you get paid a particular amount of money, and you don't have a lot of agency in negotiating that. But that's not the bit you mean. You mean all the other bits. You mean the bits where, you are signed up to do a piece of work. You're invited to take part in a dance performance by a small company that have very little money. That you're doing maybe a public artwork where maybe there's no source of money for it because you don't have a client. Without a client, typically there's no money. And I think, we've all thought about this, not just in the pandemic. I mean, this is part of the business of making a living as an artist. I think you need to do two things. What I would say if I was advising people about this, you need to do two things. The first thing is you do need to form a realistic view of what you think your time is worth and what you think your skills and experience are worth. And you need to be quite hard-nosed about that. I mean, I've come back now, I'm working as a freelance for the first time in my long career, actually. So I'm as well having to think about that. And you have to, you look around at what other people are being paid, and you just form what seems a reasonable view about what it's reasonable to ask. But there will always be things you want to do to which that financial model doesn't apply. So I think the first thing you have to do is you have to fix a kind of benchmark on what you think your skills and your time are worth. Then you have to create a kind of matrix which balances what you will ask people to pay you against actually how important the thing is to you. So there will be some things where the client hasn't got very much money. They may not going to earn very much from it, so they can't afford. They have no money to pass on to you. But you can see it would lead somewhere. You can see that it's the beginning of a thing. It might be a pilot, a television program, where you're asked to act in a thing that is a pilot for which there isn't much money, but potentially there's a series at the end of it. All that sort of stuff. And I think then at the other end of the scale, there's things where people have a significant amount of money to give you, and it's not something you're dying to do, but they're happy to pay you for it, and you're happy to do it. And I think you then have to be quite disciplined about having that matrix and thinking, I need to earn money, I need to pay a mortgage, I need to pay the rent, I need to eat. So this is a job that I wouldn't I'm not particularly going to love it, but it'll pay me decently and I'll do it. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you think, this is a young group, this is a really exciting group to work with. There's very good people in this group. None of them are earning much money, none of them have much money, but the quality of the experience I will get as an artist is terrific. And so I will, in a way, cross-subsidize the second kind of work with the first kind of work.
That's great. Because I was, there is something that was all about, I don't know, I find in my experience that some artists are very difficult, I find it hard to ask for money. And I wondered, with the current emphasis from Ofsted and schools on creativity and preparation for the world of work, whether perhaps needs to be more emphasis on selling and selling skills, because actually sometimes in my experience, it's the selling part of oneself, and doing that trading sort of thing, which is sometimes a key skill which we perhaps need to practice more, I think.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That does, and I've when I've taught in past art situations and arts management situations, that is a really key thing, and it comes very naturally to some people. And typically, if you're a performer, it probably comes more naturally to you. If you're a creative artist, if you're a writer, if you're a poet, if you're a sculptor, it may not come naturally to you at all. And I think I had a colleague in Canada. My colleague was vice president in development and sponsorship in the company I ran. She was a really clever, interesting woman, and always had, in every situation, she would have a wonderful solution to it. And she had a solution to this. And her solution to this was, she would often take people on as junior fundraisers. And she said, it's funny, they actually find it hard to ask for money. They just find that a difficult thing to do. So before she sent some young new colleague out on one of their early assignments, she would say, she would look at them and say, look at me, ask me for money. And ask me for how much, and how much are you going to ask for? I'm going to ask for, $250,000. Okay, ask me for $250,000 for this thing. And she said, they would stumble and they would be embarrassed and they would find this an artificial situation. And she wouldn't let them out of the room until they'd done it convincingly. And it is a real discipline. I mean, if you have a partner or a professional colleague or a friend whom you really trust, do it. Say to them, look, I'm in for this thing, and I'm pitching for a public art project, community art project. And I know, I'm going to be asked to sell myself, and this is what I plan to say, but I'm not a naturally assertive person. That's not what I do. And get the person to sit with you or stand with you and do it. And it is, look, Helen, like anything else in the arts, you get better with rehearsal. That's mostly we get better with rehearsal. And I think if you're the sort of person who doesn't naturally find it easy, don't try it out for the first time when it matters. Try it out for the first time when you're with a friend who can give you great feedback.
That's great advice for young people. Certainly for myself, when I was selling large products for another company, obviously under the umbrella of helping people access music, which was my passion anyway, I found it so much easier to sell someone else's product than something which is your own and it's sort of personal somehow.
Yeah,
And it's
and
ephemeral, you know.
it's sort of like, you know, like interviews, like you go through the thing of like FAQs, you know, you go out working out what are the questions you're likely to be asked. But in the case, and also that the Americans have this, you know, the elevator pitch notion. And that's another thing I think that artists find hard. It's very easy if you're sitting down to dinner with somebody, lunch or dinner, to talk for 45 minutes passionately about something you care about. In a way, that's easy. Much harder, if you know you're only going to have 2 minutes of somebody's time, is to get the core of what you have to sell. Yeah, we've got to call it that. And I think that's, you know, so when you're practice, as it were, long form selling, you know, practice spending half an hour talking in great detail about how children will access this project and how it will enhance and enrich the community, and how its maintenance costs have all been taken care of by your brilliant design. But also then when you're with a counsellor and you've only got, you know, 90 seconds or 2 minutes of their time, have the absolute core that will, when he goes away from that, gets in his car and drives away, he will remember that. Yeah. You have to be able to do both.
Yes, great. So your experience, you've met obviously probably thousands of really talented artists, musicians, creatives in all genres. So considering that a lot of these people were highly successful in the field, what qualities do they have, which means that they also sell themselves in the process? Because they must have done.
Yeah, it's an interesting question then. I mean, I would divide, I'm thinking of all the, you know, I have had a very lucky career of working with some amazing artists, and I would sort of divide them into two groups. I would say that the group whose practice involves a relationship with the public, you know, who are actors or singers or dancers, or, you know, for whom performing to the public. So already they're halfway there. They have a persona that is a kind of public persona. And I think those people, the really good ones, the really successful ones, what I feel I've always noticed in those is they have a real ability to see to the heart of a piece of work, a piece of music or literature or theatre or dance, whatever it may be, and communicate it, first of all express it, and then communicate it to a public, to an audience. And that's a very particular skill. And there are people who, you know, there are actors who understand, you know, pieces very, very profoundly, but, you know, when you see them on the stage, it's not really hitting you between the eyes. And the ones who are really, really successful, you feel, firstly, they've really penetrated, you know, they've really thought about the role of King Lear. Yeah. And they've really thought about, you know, what is the nature of the human experience that he is undergoing. And then they have this absolute skill, and it's often an instinctive skill of communicating it. Now, that's one half. The other half, creative people, i.e. the people who write the symphonies and choreograph the dances and write the poetry and do the paintings, they typically, I mean, some of them do, you know, some of them, Anthony Gormley's absolutely got that skill, but some of them don't have that skill. They have a different skill, which is they have, and I always struck me talking to quite a lot of composers who I interviewed for the BBC in my early days of my life, and, you know, getting to know what made them tick, as it were. And it was interesting. They had, and playwrights have got it, and novelists have got it. They have a sense of, they can look at the human race that they're a part of, look at the society that they're within, look at the communities around them, and they have an ability somehow to find an imaginative analog to that, and a way of expressing it imaginatively that is a very particular skill. Now, a lot of performers don't have that. You know, why? They don't need it. Why would they have it? But it struck me a lot. I did talk to to Anthony Gormley about Angel of the North, and because I did a big project for Barter Books, a public event talking about it. And it was, you know, I know Anthony well, but it was interesting. He had there was a very spiritual sense of this site and the Pithead Baths that had been on that site, and his reading of the community that for whom that site would have an almost religious significance. And I remember talking to composers in the same way. I remember talking to Michael Tippett about the Third Symphony he wrote, which captured so many elements of Black existence and Black identity and human cruelty and all of those things buried in this 45-minute piece of orchestral music. And I always felt that the really great creators of our time have somehow the ability to absorb the human experience and then to re-express it in some extraordinary some extraordinary analog, in some extraordinary thing. I don't know whether people have seen recently It's a Sin, that extraordinary Russell Davies thing. And at one level it's extraordinary drama, and of course it's all that. But someone I was talking to about it said that could only have been written by somebody inside that experience.
That's right.
And I thought that was so true, that actually Russell had gone through that journey and that experience, and then had the creative capacity and the creative imagination, but also the creative skill, the technical skill, to express those human experiences in the form of an extraordinary piece of television theatre.
And allow all those people who lived through that time to see themselves in that space as well.
Precisely so. Yeah.
Mirroring back, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, so I'm still thinking about the psychology of the cultural Northeast in the context of the globe, of the world as well, but thinking about what sort of mentalities or psychology do we need in the Northeast to come out of this, in a way you said, this sort of, I don't want to repeat words that you didn't say, but to sort of see beyond or connect with London. What do we need? What does the Northeast need to do in its psychology, its self-esteem, whatever it is?
Yes, I understand exactly. I'll answer that question, but I want to answer it first of all by way of an example of somewhere else. The 10 years I spent living and working in Birmingham were really instructive on exactly that front. Birmingham had a very, to me, psychologically, very interesting relationship with London. Everything that went wrong was London's fault. And London stole the 2000 celebrations from Birmingham. And London deprived Birmingham of this. And London marginalised Birmingham in the other. And all the good things that happened in Birmingham were absolutely done in spite of London. And I think, I don't know, it's still true now. I was living and working there in the 1990s. But I mean, I felt it very strongly. And it was particularly striking for me because for the previous 20 years, I'd lived and worked in London. So it was very, very interesting to see that perspective. And I think there is in the Northeast, I mean, people have said of the Northeast, and I think it's unkind and it isn't quite true. They've talked about the Northeast in terms of a victim culture, and I think that is not true. The Northeast does not have a victim culture, but there is a truth contained in it. I think there is a sort of introspection about the North, and at its best, it's a fantastically important element of the North's creative culture. There are people who are, so think a poet like, what's her name, that wonderful poet in, oh God, I'm sure you know who I mean. There's a really well-known Northeast poet whose name's just this minute gone out of my head. But I mean, she's buried so deep in the Northeast, particularly in Beadnell. She knows the Beadnell fishing communities very, very well and writes about them often. And there is a sense of very profound introspection about that, and in a way it gives the poetry extraordinary power. But I think we don't want to be like the Northwest at all, God forbid. But I think there is something that the Northwest has that I think the Northeast would be enriched by developing. And that's it's going back a little bit to what I was saying earlier, to have there's a sense of outward facing confidence that the Northeast, I mean, I was very, very struck in the 15 years I worked in Gateshead, and I worked very closely with George Gill, whom I admired more than I can begin to say, and his vision and his strength and his political skill and all those things. But I was very struck, and look, he achieved amazing things, and he persuaded quite resistance and sceptical Conservative governments to do things that no Labour leader would ever imagine they could do. So, you know, this isn't meant critically, but there was always a slightly apologetic, but there was a slightly self-deprecating element to the way he was. And I always felt if you could retain all that integrity and all that authenticity and all that vision and all that strength, and then just add about 15% of self-belief into that mix, you would have had something even more extraordinary, I think. And I felt that, you know, and I feel that, you know, I love the Northeast, and I'm back living here again. You know, I don't anticipate ever leaving the Northeast. I think this is, you know, this has been my home for 15 years, and it'll be for the rest of my life. And I love it, and I feel very much part of it. But there are every now and then moments when I think, this is great. We should just talk about it a little bit more positively and self-assertively and confidently than sometimes we do. And, you know, and there was always, when I was here, there was always a slight sense that people in the arts weren't, you know, found the way that Brendan talked about, you know, Great North Run and all of that. And he talked about athletics experiences in the North in a very passionate and a very confident, slightly strident way. And I thought, yes, actually, pardon me. Actually, the Northeast needs that. The Northeast needs, you know, the people who will talk for culture and creativity and the arts in the Northeast in that absolutely implacably confident way, but not losing any of the other things that make the Northeast really special, which are its gentleness and its kindness and its civility and its depth and its extraordinary, you know, spiritual depth that the Northeast has, that's very particular to this region, I think.
That's great. If I was just thinking, because a little film I made recently with friends and collaborators was about the power of song in your mind and the influence it can have. So thinking about sort of Northeast music and the messages and the moods and the sort of psychology that it conveys, can you think of any really uplifting, strong, strident, confident Northeast music or musical story that might just help that? Because I think the power of music and story is enormous.
Yes. I mean, rather than pick a piece of music, what I'd rather pick is a person who I think, for me, has really encapsulated some of the things that are really precious and extraordinary about this region. And it could have been Catherine Tickell, you know, who is in some ways people feel of as the soul of the region. It could have been Sting, whom I got to know well living and working here, who is more of a Northeasterner, I think, than he's sometimes given credit for. But it's actually neither of those two people. It would be Alistair Anderson. And the reason I would say Alistair is he, apart from the fact that he's a stonking fine musician, but apart from that, to answer exactly the question you've asked, he has that, to me, that combination of a very profound sense of rootedness in the soil of this region, a real sense of rootedness in the culture and the spirituality and the human values of this region. But, you know, he's toured the world as a virtuoso solo performer, and he's done collaborative projects with all kinds of people in other art forms, in other kinds of music, and he's getting on in his life now. But I mean, he's as passionately exploratory now as he ever was, and I think for me he encapsulates two wonderful qualities. One is an absolutely profound sense of connectedness with the culture and the spirit of the place. And the other is a constantly inquisitive sense of what's happening elsewhere and in other ways and in other kinds of ways of working and wanting to make connections with it. And I find that an incredibly inspiring combination. Personally, I found it so.
So if you had a young person with an idea, a big idea, who wanted, this is just a daft question, but, you know, if supposing, you know, we wanted to make the Northeast musical with Alistair Anderson in it, and make sure that everybody sees it and everybody feels uplifted and transformed. Where do you start?
Gosh, they always say, don't they, that the great pieces of art always start with a very may not be simple, but a very strongly articulated core idea. I mean, as I'm sure you have, I've been involved in pieces, artworks that I've been enormously proud of, and pieces that I couldn't get away from fast enough. And I think some of the worst experiences I've had in the arts have been where the thing has flopped around, and there's, you have a core team. Maybe you're making a television program, you have a core team, and you have a writer and you have a director, and then the designer comes on board and they have very different views about how the thing should look. And then you have a composer who comes to work with you, and they seem to be living in a completely different world. And you get this terrible thing of this thing, the simple core of this thing, pulled away in so many directions. And I think that, so what I would say to somebody who's thinking of putting something together, as you've said, is it's really important to start with an idea that's really clear and you can express in 2 or 3 sentences, and then to be absolutely wedded to that, and to bring on board collaborators who believe in your idea. Don't bring on board collaborators. I mean, bring on board collaborators who will enrich your idea. Yeah, for sure. But don't bring on board collaborators who will subvert it. No, and not necessarily in mischief or in malice, but just because they have strong independent ideas of their own. Yeah. So I think that's what I would say. And then the people that can enrich your idea, that's wonderful. But if somebody feels to be pulling it in a different direction, that they can't really be part of the journey, or you're going to end up with a mess.
Yeah, great, thank you. I suppose the only last question, I guess, unless there's other things you want to say, but if you were a young person wanting to study arts at the moment, what would you say to them?
It's funny. My daughter actually is. She's not a young person now, but she's had a big career change, and it's involved some learning in artistic practice. I'd say 2 things. I think I'd say don't eschew formal training. Sometimes there's a fashionable thing that says no, just find a guru, find an enterprise, join it. Start from the ground up, make the tea, and I think there is. For the good training, there is real merit in it. I mean, there is some terrible training, but the good training has merit in it. It has 3 kinds of merit. It accelerates your journey, so you get to a level of learning much faster if you're being properly and well trained and taught. Secondly, there is a real likelihood that the good training establishments have connections and links with professional practice, and so you will find routes that my daughter found this. She did a journalist training course, and it had links with some very key national organs, national outlets, and it accelerated journey she'd probably have made anyway, but it accelerated a journey for her into really good professional paid opportunities because the educational training establishment had those connections. So don't eschew decent training, and try as far as you can to avoid bad training. And if you're in training which is not going anywhere, where you feel you're not being respected, where you don't respect the people who are teaching you, where you feel you're surrounded by fellow students, co-learners who just have a different agenda from you, don't stay with it. Don't stay with it. Get out of it. But the other thing I'd say, and it may sound like a contradiction, but I think it isn't actually a contradiction. It's a compliment to that, maybe. Is when I was at the BBC, I was involved a little bit in recruitment for the BBC, bringing in recruits into the BBC, graduate recruits, and it was a very particular problem at the BBC. Was that people would want to work there for all the wrong reasons. I mean, some people for the right reasons, but a lot of people for all the wrong reasons. And you get a very particular kind of person who would interview. Was typically they'd been to Oxbridge, they were very articulate, they appeared very sophisticated, they appeared very knowledgeable, and they were going to be dreadful. And they would last for 6 months, and if they hadn't become Director General in 6 months, they would be a complete liability. So we tried to develop a means of recruitment that would somehow find those people and prune them out. So you got the people who really wanted to work in radio or television because that's what they wanted to do, not because it was a tick on their CV. So to young people, I'd say pick things that you really want to do, places where you really want to work, and then don't think in terms of how quickly can you get to the top of them. You know, if there's a theatre company that you really admire, and there's an unpaid internship, maybe if you can afford to do an unpaid internship. Some people can't, some people luckily can. Or if there's a junior job that isn't paid very much, but it's where you want to be, go for that. And don't spend every day thinking, how are you going to clamber up to the next level? I remember once I applied for a job and a promotion, and I didn't get it. I was very fed up about that. And a friend said to me, took me aside and said, do you know what? You're more likely to be promoted to the next level up when you're a little bit better, when you're doing a little bit better at the job you're in. And that's a very profound truth, I think. So the other thing I'd say to young people is, you know, get into the place you want to be, or a kind of place you want to be. Don't agonize about rushing up layer by layer by layer. Find things you can do them well, be committed to them, feel you have a reason to get up in the morning, you know, get out of bed in the morning, feel there are things, something you really value and you're enjoying doing it. Then your career will work. Magic will take hold of your career. If you do that and you're doing good things and people like working with you and people trust you and people value you, and then you will find that you will get asked to do more interesting things and something that begins to look like a career will happen. I think that careers are like acupuncture. I think the fascinating thing about acupuncture is you stick the needle in one place and you get a benefit in somewhere else. And I think you get, it's magic to me, complete magic, how that works. And I think there's something like that about careers, that if you go into a company simply wanting to be able to speed through putting together a glamorous CV as quickly as you can, it won't work. If you just go in wanting to do good things, do good stuff, do stuff that you care about, stuff that you're proud of, stuff that other people will like and enjoy and value, you will find, you know, day by day by day, you move steadily through what might then subsequently retrospectively be described as a career.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic insights and information and advice. Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you interviewed. And I hope
No, it's been a pleasure, Helen. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm so glad to be back here. And, you know, I'm so happy to be remaking all the connections of people that I cherished and loved when I was here, and I'm so happy to be remaking all those connections. So thank you very much.
If anybody's watching, what would you like people to do? So I might cut this question, but how can people help you? What?
Well, I think it's. I did a period of my life when I was advising a lot of people who were setting up new arts organizations, and I you know, as you do with these things, you have a sort of relatively standard presentation that you do, and you tune minimally in different places. And one of the things I always talked about was brands, and you know, the business of defining your mission very simply in a very few words. And I did quite a lot of research, and I did a couple of talks for marketing conferences on brands in terms of how you define what you want to do and what you want to be in a very clear, pithy way. And I got to really love some of them, and I, you know, there was a whole string of them, but I loved, and I thought, it is interesting, I can't even which company it was now. I think it was Sky originally, Sky Television. Its brand was called Believe in Better. And I think it's a sort of cousin of Build Back Better, isn't it? But I think Believe in Better, it's a terrific thing, that. And I think, so what I think I would say to you know, people living and working in this region, and, you know, we all have bad days, you know, we all get out of bed, we all do things that go terribly wrong, we mess things up, relationships that feel terribly important to us come unstuck. And it's a sort of cousin of, but I think, you know, Tomorrow is Another Day is a sort of facile version of it. But I think believe in better, that there's always, you can always do better. You can always be better. The world can always be better. You can always contribute more integrity and more authenticity and more generosity and more kindness to the world around you. We can all be better every day. We know we can be better. So I think I would say believe in better would be my parting shot.
That's fantastic. So I guess you can help so many organizations and people out there. How would they contact you?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and I mean, what I'm doing is because it's interesting. I've always, in the last years of my life, been in England, in the Midlands, in the Northeast, in Canada, and in the United States. I've always done jobs where I was doing a single job, one job at a time, and I'm really enjoying this period when I'm advising people. I'm doing some teaching, higher education, university teaching in arts management, and of course, the great wonderful thing in terms about the pandemic is that one can do extraordinary international work without leaving one's front room. So I'm doing stuff, and I'm doing 1 or 2 advisory projects and consultancy projects where I'm helping people solve challenges to which they think, or I think I have a contribution to make. So I'm sort of building that up as I go. So I'm very happy to, and taking my own advice that I gave you in this conversation a little while ago. There are some things where I'm expecting a significant sum of money because I'm not expecting to enjoy them very much. And there are other things where I know they will be an absolute treat and I will work with glorious people. And, in that case, the money isn't the key thing. So LinkedIn.
Thank you very much. That's such a pleasure to talk. Thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure, Helen, real pleasure.
Thank you.